Okay, so now bishop to f4 by Tal. Basically, he wants to exchange this active bishop of black so that he can take control over the center. And after that, king to e5, and now look at the king of Tal. I mean, it's an absolute monster. And you can see the speciality in the Tal games that he always uses all of his resources to paralyze the opponent's position. As you can see in the current position, this king proudly sits on d5, meaning that this sad light square bishop on d7 can literally never touch, check or attack it. It acts as a perfect blockade against this e6 pawn and sets the stage for Tal to start pushing his own pawns in the future. Okay, so now here black pushed a6, preparing for bishop to a5 so that he can exchange this light square bishop. And at the end, you can see black ends up with this double pawn structure. Okay, so now since this d5 pawn is attacked, so that's why here black immediately pushed d4. And now there are multiple ways for white to continue this game, like white can go for king to c7 or maybe king to c5, which targets these pawns. But here Tal plays the best move, rook to e2, with the intention of rook to d2 so that he can target this pawn. And let's suppose if black captured this pawn on a2 by rook takes a2, now comes king to c5, targeting both pawns, and obviously black can only defend one pawn at a time. So let's suppose if he pushed this pawn further to d3, attacking this rook, simply rook to d2. And now you can see both pawns are targeted. And let's suppose if black tries to defend this b5 pawn by rook to a5, so now comes rook takes d3, and in the next move you can see white will go for rook to a3, trying to exchange this rook, and by this you can see this is completely winning for white. So that's why after the move, yeah, let me go back to the move rook to d2. Yes, so that's why here the best move for black is to bring this rook to a4. And now let's suppose if white captures this d3 pawn by rook takes d3, now comes rook to c4 check, completely giving up this another pawn. And after king takes b5, simply rook to c2. And you can see in the next move, black is going to capture these pawns, and by this, black can survive this game. Okay, so in the actual game, after rook to e2, here black goes for. And after that, rook to c8, and clearly you can see the intention of black. Okay, so now Tal continues the game with b4. And after that, rook to c2 by black, and obviously white cannot capture this rook, so that's why. A good move by black, preparing for rook to c4 so that he can target this b4 pawn. But let me go back to the move rook to f3. Here some of you might be thinking that what if we have so basically some of you might be thinking that if we have to attack this b4 pawn, then why we didn't go for the move rook to b2? I mean, that's also attack this b4 pawn. But guys, in reality, this move will be a mistake. Yes, you are right. But why this is a mistake? This is because now white can go for the move which is king to c5. And now you can see no one can defend this b5 pawn. So that's why the move rook to, so that's why basically the move, let me go back. So that's why the move rook to c2 actually blocks the king from coming to this c file. So, and that's the main motive behind this move. Okay, so now Tal brings his rook to f5, targeting this b5 pawn. And now for black, it's better to start pushing these kingside pawns, but instead he made a mistake by pushing b6. And guys, now I have a question for you. My question is, why this move is a mistake? Because one thing is obvious, that white cannot capture this pawn on b5 due to the threat of rook takes f2, and this king also can't go to this c file due to this rook, so that he can target this pawn. So why this move is a mistake? Just pause the video and try to figure it out. Okay guys, so basically in this position, all the problems are created by this rook. But why? This is because so basically now white can continue this by pushing g3, preparing to push h4. And let's suppose if black continues this game by rook to b2, trying to attack this pawn, but now white can continue by rook takes b5. What if rook takes f2? And since this h2 pawn is attacked, so now white will push h4, rook to f3 attacking this pawn, but simply rook takes b6, Rook takes g3, rook to c6, trying to create a passer on b5, and after that rook to b3. Okay, so if he tries to stop to target this, simply king to c5, king to f7, b5, h5, rook to c7 check, king to f6, b6. And now tell me, who is going to stop this passer? No one. So that's why let me go back to the move. Let me go back to this move. So that's why it's important for black to attack this. So basically, instead of b6, it's important to play g6. But why? This is because now let's suppose if white now captured this b5 pawn by rook takes b5, we will continue with the same variation with rook takes f2, rook takes b7, rook takes g2, h4, h5, b5, g5, attacking this pawn, h takes g5, simply h4. And you can see here now both sides have a passer, rook to e7, h2, rook to e1, trying to stop this pawn, but simply rook to b2, targeting this pawn. And king to c6, rook to c2 check, king to d6, and after that you can see here black will give multiple checks, and once this king goes there, you can see this king blocks his own pawn from promotion, and by this you can see no side can progress, and that will be a draw. Okay, so in the actual game, after the move b6, here Tal continues with h4 with the same idea. And now for white, it's better to just slide this king and to slide this king and this rook so that he can start pushing this pawn. But instead here Tal made an inaccuracy by pushing f4. And that's an inaccuracy because you can see here black can easily counter this by pushing g6 so that he can cover this f5 square so that this pawn cannot be pushed further. But instead here black pushed the wrong pawn, which is h6. And now the move. And basically to win this game, now Tal has to just find the move king to c5, which attacks this rook. And let's suppose if rook to d3, which attacks this pawn, simply g4. And if rook to g3, rook to b6 check, king to f7, rook to d6 check, rook to d6, opening the root of this pawn, simply rook takes g4, b5, rook takes f4, b6, king to e7, b7, and you can see in the next move, this is promoting, so black has to stop this somehow, rook to g6, attacking this pawn, so that's why king to f7, rook to c6, preparing for rook to c8, so to stop this, rook to b8, but this is of no use because of king to b6, and you can see in the next move king to a7, and yep, game over. Okay, so in the actual game after h6, here Tal missed that move and he made a mistake by king to c5, and that's a mistake because now black finds the best move, rook to d3, and you can see now the black rook on d3 is like a hero who is targeting this g3 pawn as well as simultaneously keeping an eye over this king, over this a3 square so that he can. And after that, rook to g3. And you can see this game will end in a draw. But guys, surprisingly, here black goes for the move rook to f3, attacking the wrong pawn because now Tal finds the best move, rook to f5 check, defending this f4 pawn as well as opening the path for this b pawn. And in this position, the final move by Tal is king to c7, and here Jan Timman resigned. This is because now tell me who is going to stop this b pawn from promotion. I mean, let's suppose if this game continues like rook takes g4, b6, rook to b4, b7, h5, b8 equal to queen, rook takes b8, king takes b8. And if you are hoping that this rook cannot stop these two pawns, you are wrong because of king to c7, g4, and rook to h6, simply targeting this pawn. And if after king to g7, you can see rook takes h5, and you can see this is all over for black. Like this video and I will see you in the next one. This is your host Bison signing off. Bye bye.